getting there. o'clock, a little after, on September the 6th. We are here tonight for a board work session. I'd like to call the board work session to order. Mr. Rabe, can you call the roll, please?
Mrs. Mason?
Here.
Mrs. Nolan?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
And Mr. Combs is joining virtually, so
So
he won't be.
Yeah, we don't roll him.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Let's stand for Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I need a motion to approve the agenda for tonight's meeting.
So moved. Second.
Discussion. Call the roll.
Mrs. Mason?
Yes.
Mrs. Nolan?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes, thank you. Okay, we're now going to go into discussion. The purpose of this work session is to discuss athletic facilities, and I think Mr. Spicer wanted to start off, so I will give him the floor.
Thank you, President Miranda, members of the board. Mr. Rabe is here this evening to help us further discuss the athletic facilities across the street. Most specifically, the board did take action to allow the demolition of the Robbins building and the current weight room. And so there needs to be a solution to that. And in that solution was presented to you a couple options. And so we're here this evening to discuss those options, the financing, the effects of all of these expenditures, if you will, on the 5-year forecast. And I think that's where we are this evening. So I'll turn it over to either Mr. Rabe or back to you, President Miranda.
Mr. Rabe, are you ready to roll?
I'm ready.
Go ahead.
Okay. So obviously you guys asked me to take a look at the different scenarios. There were so many different scenarios to try to print all those out and give it to you. I didn't think it made a whole lot of sense. So what I did is I put together this spreadsheet that we can change numbers, manipulate numbers, and you can see how things will play out with that. Basically what I did is the top half of the spreadsheet here, and I can send this to you at any time if you want to play with it as well. So the top half of it is directly from the 5-year forecast that was approved back in May. So total revenues, expenditures, excess revenues, cash balance, that all came straight off of that May 5-year forecast. Obviously, we know that's going to change a little bit here when we do the next forecast in November, but at least gives us a starting point. The second piece is the capital projects. So obviously, there's a number of capital projects that are kind of in the works, being discussed, so on and so forth. So obviously, the first one being the auditorium. The auditorium, the board has expressed that they want to take that money directly out of the general fund. I took this off of the presentation that was given to you last. That's where that number comes from. So that came to the $2.6 million. There's also the high school roof. There was the smaller section that was done recently. And then the larger section of the roof for the high school was about $800,000, which would be done next year, or over the summer, I should say. The stadium bleachers on the home side, $1.2 million. And then the bottom two are the nest. And I kind of broke those two pieces up in the nest with just the bathrooms, the weight room, and the wrestling room, and then what the nest looks like with just the gym. And these, I rounded these numbers off based upon what Conger gave us from our last meeting with them. So if we take a look at it, if you were to pay for all of these improvements out of the general fund, that bottom line there is what impact it would have on the cash balance. So the end of 24, we would drop down to 21 million. In 2025, we would be at 15 million. In 2026, we would be at 7 million. What I can tell you based upon this is going out one more year with this, 2027 with no changes, you would end up with a negative cash balance. Now, when you're looking at a negative cash balance, the way the state looks at it is once you're 3 years out with a negative cash balance, that's going to put you in fiscal caution. When you're 1 year out, that's when it's going to put you in fiscal emergency. So if you were to take the entire amount out of the general fund without any levy or any new additional revenues and so forth, the district would be in fiscal caution in fiscal year 25, where that would put us. So the next section on the forecast is just looking at the nest piece of it, the 7 million, the 3 million. If we were to finance that at a 4% interest rate, I did talk to our municipal advisor and bond counsel. They kind of gave me the interest rate and some of these numbers. $7 million at 4% for a 30-year would be an annual payment of $404,000. And then you can kind of see, 3 million is 173, 10 million would be the 5.78. And again, I can change the years, the number of years, which will then, we'll change up here at the top to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like moving forward. So basically, what kind of scenario would you like to see? And I can plug it in, you guys can get a idea what it would look like.
The one thing on there that I don't know that we've done a vote or anything on is the stadium bleachers for 1.2. I know it's been talked about, this isn't the first time I've seen it, but I didn't know that it was gonna possibly, or what did we? I don't think we voted.
Like I said, I just threw it in there because I knew it
Because we
was
talked about it,
something
right.
at some point in time. So obviously, those
And
pieces
it
we can
probably,
take out.
Jeff would probably say it makes sense to do it at the same time we're doing everything else, because we're gonna be back there turning dirt around and doing things like that.
Right. A couple other pieces is when we look at the cash balance, June and July June and December are typically our lowest cash balance months because July, we typically get our first real estate tax, December, and then January, we get our first real estate tax. So when we look at our cash balance, this is kind of the low point in the year, so to speak. When we look at the cash balance, typically best practice would be at about a 60 to 90 day cash reserve. So when we look at 25 and you're looking at 15 million, our expenditures on a monthly basis average about $6 million a month. So when you're looking at 25 and you're looking at 15 million, you're looking at 2 months worth of cash. If something would happen, if you fall below that and something would happen that you don't get that advance from the county auditor, you're going to be in trouble as far as get into a negative balance at the end of a particular month. So you got to be cognizant of that. One of the other pieces that we've already had some discussion with is if you do choose to finance any part of this, because that nest would sit on the same parcel of land as the new middle school, the OFCC, and you would have to use that parcel of land as collateral. OFCC basically said you can't do it because it's our building on there as well. So what basically would happen is we would have to, and Jeff has already contacted the civil engineer about it, about splitting that property up into 2 different parcels so that the new middle school would sit on its own parcel. The nest and probably the stadium would then sit on a separate parcel.
So there'd be 3 parcels there.
Yeah, instead
that
of
was gonna be
basically
my-
instead
that
of
was
one.
one of my questions.
So that's one of the things. If we borrow anything, if we borrow any type of funds, that's one piece that we would definitely have to do. Because OFCC basically, because the middle school is a joint project with them, they won't allow us to use that as collateral.
Now,
Does it matter how many parcels we have? Like, is it
It
bad
does.
to have too many, or we
No,
could
it doesn't matter.
not? It's just paperwork to file to keep everything in order.
Exactly.
I guess one of my questions is, and Jeff, you may be able to answer this, is when we do if we split those up into 3 parcels, would the parcel for the new middle school just be the square there and not include the junior high, or would that include all the junior high property as well, or would we have that separate?
I'd have to look, keep in mind, between the junior high and high school campus today, there's like 8, 9 parcels that make up that whole campus today without changing anything. We're really just splitting off where the nest and the stadium would be into its own parcel, so it would add an additional parcel to what we have today. The total number we've got on campus, I mean, the district over the years has bought up homes and different things to make the campus that we see today. It certainly looks a lot different than when I graduated a long, long time ago, so.
There weren't any dinosaurs.
Brian, on those loans, with whatever type of loan that is, are there penalties if you pay them off early?
It kind of depends on which way we go. So there's 2 types of loans that we can do. One would be a direct placement. Direct placement would be the preferred method. That would be where we go to a bank and the bank would loan us, what we need. The big thing with a direct placement is, can you find a bank that's willing to give you the loan for the number of years that you want? Once you start getting into the 20, 25, 30 years, some banks probably aren't going to be willing to loan that to you. The other piece of it would be a COPS, which basically is a capital lease, is the way that goes. So when you get further out, when you get to the 30 years, that's probably going to be more of the COPS issue. That one you won't have early pay. You won't be able to pay it off early. Direct placement, there's a possibility, but it all comes down to what terms a bank is willing to give you. And that's one of the things that the Bradley Payne advisors that we work with, that's what they do, is they'll go out and shop it for us to the various banks to find us, make sure that we get the best rate, the best terms, so on and so forth. But that's what we pay them to do.
Now, if I remember correctly, and my memory is certainly fallible, we were waiting on a determination as if we could do 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, or 30 years. And we've now determined that we could do 30 if we chose to.
Yeah, talking with bond counsel, he doesn't see us having any problems
Okay.
going out
So
for 30 years.
anything we would do less than that, if we'd come in and say, okay, we want to do 20 years, then
Right.
that would just reduce the amount that we would pay in interest over
Right.
that time.
The idea was the concern of, this isn't your typical fully masonry constructed building, because the top half of it's going to be a pole barn. And how would they deem that as far as useful life? Because obviously you can't take a loan out for more than what the useful life is. But bond counsel said 30 years should. He doesn't think you could go beyond 30 years, but 30 years is reasonable.
Okay. I have another question. I have all kinds of questions. I apologize. No, I'm not going to apologize for that. The high school roof, $800,000.
Right.
Do we have, and we take $500,000 every year and we put it into a permanent improvement fund to fund things like that? Do we have that money there? Jeff's coming for the mic.
The $500,000 that we put in for maintenance goes into our 034 fund, the classroom facilities maintenance account, I think it's called, Brian. That money can only be spent on OFCC projects. The roof of the high school that needs to be finished is not part of an OFCC addition or renovation. It's part of the 1989 addition onto the old junior high. So we would not be able to use 034 funds for the high school roof.
Is there an opportunity to flip funds around in some way? And I don't mean that in a nefarious way, but in part of the new building, we have things that we are doing. Is there some way of using
the permanent improvement fund for that rather than somewhere else.
Well, there's no money that goes into the permanent improvement fund like on an ongoing basis at this point in time. We have a permanent improvement that we can use for pretty much any capital project, but the $500,000 goes into the 034, and because that portion of the high school roof, some of the high school I can use 034 funds on, some of it I can't because not all of it was OFCC funded building, if you will. So if it's the NGC, if it's the cafeteria, the kitchen, I can use 034, but if it's the older section of the building, which is where this portion of the roof is, we cannot.
Okay.
Now, the permanent improvement, the 003 fund that we do have, there is money in there, but that's, there's two accounts set up in there. The one is the stadium turf replacement, so any of the rentals off the football field go into that fund to be used when the turf. The other fund, a couple of years ago, we transferred money into that. So we have the two loans that are with the site belt property, the purchase of the site belt property and the bus garage. And when we transferred the money in there, that money is used to pay off those. So that money has basically has been set aside,
It's been
designated
earmarked
strictly.
already.
It's been earmarked to pay those loans off. So when you look at the reports, there's money in 003, but they're designated for those two purposes.
Okay.
And did, the 10 million for the nest, I think was about the money we saw last time. Did we get anything on the bathrooms that we can scale down?
Great question. Yes, I was able to set up a meeting
Awesome.
with the Claremont County. Jeff was there, SHP. They're willing to work with us. If, big if, capital letters, bold print, if, we can get it to 2,000 would be the capacity that they would look at for the number of bathrooms that we would need. It could significantly drop the price of that section to almost $800,000.
So that would be out of, on this number, that would be out of that 7 million.
Yes, they could take off potentially, it could potentially be $800,000.
And just to be clear, for those people that are watching online tonight, don't lose my train of thought here. When you say capacity, you're talking about the amount of people that we put in the stadium on an average on a given night.
Yeah, so the capacity would be, max capacity would be somewhere in the 5,500 to 5,700 range if you were to replace the current visitor section and you kept everything that we have. We would need to put 61 female restrooms and 30 male restrooms in. On average right now, we have about 2,000 people that come to a football game.
That's a third.
That's correct. And so the only time that we would ever get to potentially 5,500 would be if we were to host a playoff game, like a Division II or a Division III football game, or potentially our own playoff game, a first round game. So there's the potential for that. If that were to happen, we did state that we would bring in porta potties, et cetera, to accommodate that 5,500 beyond the potential reduction that we're looking for.
The literal overflow.
Yes, yes, yes.
Unique choice of wording, thank you.
Yes.
You're welcome.
So that is, I don't want to call it a windfall because we don't have it, but that is a potential 800,000.
Correct.
Dollars there.
Potential, yes. We would have to ask for that waiver when we apply for the permitting, et cetera, and submit,
And
yes.
you actually attended that meeting? and-
Yes,
and
so yes,
spoke to
I
this, so,
set that meeting up.
okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I know that's an if. And
Correct.
we would have to submit for approval.
Yes.
But when we go to make a decision, that's a huge number. Like,
It
can
is.
we bank on that number being in our final decision?
Nothing happens until it happens, just like, when sometimes when you come and you see people that get hired here, it doesn't happen until at least 3 of you vote for it. It's, a little bit different with the county, but it doesn't happen until it happens. So you can't count on it. They gave us a verbal commitment that they would work with us. They agree that the 61 and 30 is too many. It doesn't make sense. But we can't hold them to that, and we would have to hope for that waiver. But yeah, you're correct. It's an exorbitant amount of bathrooms, and it's a lot of dollars. $800,000 is a lot of money.
Yeah,
Is that the only option, the 5,000 or 2,000, or could they come back and say you need 3,000, or, you know, like? more
Correct,
than
they
two,
could,
but
they
less
could.
than
I
5,000?
think that there's the potential for the 800,000 savings, but it could be less. I think that they could
500,000.
come back and say, no, you don't need to have enough for 5,700 people, but you probably should have enough for 3,000, which is still significantly less. It's half. So there's the potential for that. You know, we're going to shoot for the average of around 2,000. That's what we have for our games here. So that's what we'll shoot for.
And do we have any kind of timetable when we might, we've already approached them, have we asked them and we're waiting for a response from them?
No, we're waiting for you all to make a decision, and then we submit stuff. I think it was in the February timeframe that we would submit that paperwork to them. When we submit for permits would be somewhere in February potentially.
So we're not gonna get a commitment till February?
Correct.
And why don't we go ahead and, if the temperature of the board is to go ahead with this project, why would we not just go ahead and ask for the permit, and if you have to sit on it for 6 months, you'd at least have it?
I'm not a construction manager, nor am I an architect, but I'm gonna guess you gotta have the drawings, the schematic design, the DD, et cetera, then you can do that.
Yeah, the whole design has to be done before you submit for permits. As Mr. Spicer said, we had a great conversation, certainly a spirit of cooperation. They understand where we were coming from, but it doesn't become official until you submit for permit and you get an approved permit back. And that's at probably 50% CD. We talked about trying to maybe do that permitting process a little bit earlier than full construction documents being done. They were certainly open to that. But the signature, the stamp, the whatever you want to call it, being official is not until you get that permit approval back.
Okay, so you need the schematic, is that what you need?
No,
Schematic
you're about
design?
50%. So you've got SD, schematic design, design development, and then you've got construction documents. You're about 50% through construction documents before you can submit for permit. So it's very much towards the end of the design process.
Not a lot of changes happening.
There not a lot of changes happen. I mean, the only real option, if they come back and say, you know, they change their mind or there's a change in leadership and they don't agree with the people we met, would be you reduce the size of your bleachers, your overall capacity. You know, that would be the either redoing the design or increasing your budget or reducing your capacity in the stadium. That would be the options that we would have at that point in time to try to deal with that worst case scenario.
And what's the projection of student population size over the next 5 to 10 years? Is it
I think
because-
it's going to be pretty stagnant, but I'll let Mr. Spicer answer that question.
Agreed. I mean, we've been pretty stagnant, if you will, or flat. OFCC did their study, and we're pretty flat. I apologize. The question's a great question. We have the data because I've given it to somebody.
Well, I know we've talked about it. I just
We
don't remember off the
have.
top of
It's
my head.
pretty flat, and it's been flat for 15, 20 years. It's been
And
pretty.
flat's a really good thing.
It's good.
for
We've been very
stable.
consistent. That doesn't mean we don't get a bubble. We do get a bubble of, 550 kids rolling through. But, we're
Right,
pretty.
But we don't have to say, hey, in 5 years, we're going to have a much bigger high school to.
Correct.
Consider.
We're not a sprawling suburban
Right.
area at this time. We're pretty landlocked. So, yes.
Okay, so I'm sitting here playing with your spreadsheet, which I really, truly enjoy. And $800,000 moves the needle somewhere between 46,000 in payments.
Got it. My recommendation to you was anything that you do stadium-wise, and nest-wise, I think you're going to have to do some type of financing. I don't think trying to take this out of the general fund makes sense because it's going to eat your cash balance up way too quickly. I think you're gonna have to finance. Now, what it comes down to is, what of these three items do you want to, which of these three items do you want to move forward with? And then, once that's decided, then we can look at what the payments look like, to kind of finish things off. Now, obviously, SHP would like an answer as far as what you're going to do sooner or later, but the financing piece, we really wouldn't start any type of financing piece until March, April, May, because you don't have it, you don't need the money until you start building construction, if that makes sense. So I think you still have some time to figure out exactly how to finance it and what's the best way. I think the more pressing issue is, of those three items, what do you guys want to move forward with? That makes sense.
On your spreadsheet, could we make the nest with bathrooms 6.5 million? Because it sounds like up
Yep.
to 8 might be, but 6.5 would be conservative.
Yeah.
Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah,
That gets
that
us a
makes sense.
closer real number and is still pretty conservative if they say 3,000 bathrooms
Right.
instead of 2.
So,
Jeff?
I just wanted to follow up real quick on Brian's talk about schedule and like when we want to know things. You know, one of the reasons we're kind of pushing for a decision is we're going to need to demolish the current weight room in Robbins building next spring. I need as little time without the nest or the current facilities as possible, because we really don't have much in the way of where are we going to put our track team, our football team, wrestling, what are we going to do with them? Because there's going to be some amount of time. It might be 2 months, it might be 6 months. Obviously, we're going to try to minimize it, but there's going to be a little bit of time where, most likely, this isn't written in stone, and for people watching, I don't want people to panic because we're already starting to think about this. We're going to find a place for our programs, but we want to minimize the amount of time, if not eliminate the amount of time, that we don't have the current facilities before the new facilities are opened up.
Would the new facilities be ready for use before the junior high?
Absolutely, they have
Okay.
to be.
Okay.
There's no way we could go 2 years without those
Right.
facilities.
Yep.
So we're
Yep.
starting to talk about that, but, kind of until we know what we're doing, we can only kind of talk about it. We
Yep.
really can't start putting in hard, fast plans to deal with that.
So we're talking about the old bus garage, the weight room, and the Robbins building going away end of next school year, of this school year? Or
Be next summer.
Summer of '23.
Yep.
So we've got 10 months, whatever that is.
But I got to design it, I've got to get it permitted, I've got to get it bid out, start construction, there's a
All the
lot that
way.
has to happen in those 10 months. So, now whether or not we can delay that demo and I mean, we're going to work with Conger on that, and we're going to put off demoing those structures as long as we can and start building whatever, you all decide and give us direction to build. And again, we're trying to minimize or eliminate, actually, we're trying to eliminate and at least minimize, how far apart those two milestones are.
Yeah, I seem to recall the last time we discussed when those might be demolished, it was gonna be like around Christmas of '23, so it'd actually be halfway through the '23.
I can tell you, if we had a place to put them, Conger would tear them down in June. And whether or not we can push them off until, August or September, that's yet to be determined. We're working on that, but
The Robbins building is the one that's actually underneath the footprint, correct? The bus garages, like, kind of like we had the
There's
two.
still, that's still in play a little bit, Mr. Miranda, but they, quite honestly, they both will probably be
They're
underneath the
supposed to,
footprint.
yeah.
I thought when I looked at it before, and again, my memory's only so good, I thought that we were gonna have a situation very similar to what we had at Boyd a few years ago when we built it, where the buildings were 10 foot apart.
Now, a lot of it depends on, we're still doing, we haven't finished the completed stormwater detention calculations and how much detention do we need, and that's going to adjust exactly where that building footprint lands. So none of that's written in stone yet.
Hey, Jeff,
Yes.
can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. So, quick question about the capacity issues we were talking about before. If we do reduce the capacity in the bathrooms, how does that change the overall footprint of the nest that we basically have to replace? So just to be clear, we made a decision that we are going to do the part of the nest that includes bathrooms, weight room, and wrestling room, because we are demolishing what's already there for so many reasons. So we have to essentially move forward with that portion of this capital project. But it seems to me that if we reduce the capacity of the bathrooms, it's going to change the footprint of that area. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, it is correct. The overall footprint would shrink slightly. So your $800,000 savings, that estimate, a lot of it is a reduction in plumbing fixtures and pipe and sewer. But some of it also is that whole building might be 10 feet shorter than it used to be, because I don't need those 10 feet for those extra bathrooms. So the overall building would also shrink. So there's obviously some savings that come in the building structure itself being slightly smaller. It's not going to be half the size, but, and I'm guessing, I haven't seen it, I'm guessing as to whether or not, is it 5 feet, is it 10 feet, is it 15 feet? I honestly don't know the answer to that question.
So what I'm not sure of now is that capacity was based on max capacity. What does the state require us to build? The decision to build something that matches max capacity, is that truly in our hands or not?
It is not in our hands. That is what the plumbing code calls for. But the plumbing inspector, the building inspector, has some leeway, and I'm not a building inspector, so I can't tell you the exact details of, how much freedom they have to grant some variance, things like that, where you look at it and go, all right, kind of like what we just said, there's going to be seats for 5,500 people in that stadium. We average 2,000. We want to build bathrooms for 2,000, and if we get a big event, we're in the playoffs, we're hosting a neutral site playoff game, which OHSAA's minimum for that is a 5,000 seat stadium, which is kind of why that's kind of been our target. That we would bring in, whether it's portalets or maybe some nicer, I don't know if anybody's been up to like the Renaissance Festival where they've got the big trailers almost with restrooms in them. They're a little bit nicer. Do you bring something like that in that we could do that for those events? I liken these restrooms in the building code for restrooms is kind of like parking. You look at Boyd and Sightbelt, and 95% of the time, we've got plenty of parking at Boyd and Sightbelt. We built them 4 or 5 years ago. But you know what? When you have 6th grade graduation, when you've got open house, when you've got a half a dozen events a year, people are parking in the grass. They're parking everywhere. Same thing at our current high school, junior high. When we have the craft show, people are everywhere. So, how many parks have we all been to that have enough parking for the biggest event that they have every year? It's not, in my mind, realistic, but that's code. So in order to not put in bathrooms for 5,500 people, we have to ask for a variance, and we have to get approval from the county. And we've started that process.
Is there precedence in asking for that variance? Like, is this something, here's what I don't want us to do. I don't want us to think that we're going to have a realistic shot at this only to be told that, sorry guys, code says 5,500. Because we shouldn't even brought it up if there's not precedence and there's not even a chance, right? Like,
There-
it sounds like there's a chance, but I like to deal in realities. And is there a precedence in other school districts? Can Conger tell us that, yeah, we've gotten variances in similar projects in the last 3 out of 5 in a similar situation? I'm not asking you to commit to anything. I'm just saying I want to speak about something realistic right now, instead of there might be 800K out there and then find out we get smacked in the face and say, what I started this conversation with, it's not really our decision. Code's going to dictate how many bathrooms we put in there, yeah?
There is precedence. It does happen. It's not like we'd be the first entity to get a variance like this. I can tell you from sitting in the meeting with the building officials with Claremont County, I think Mr. Spicer would agree. We got a really good response back. They understand. They completely agreed that restrooms for 5,500 people wasn't necessary. You know, they wouldn't come back and say, all right, you can design for 2,000 or 2,500. We talked about those numbers. We talked about our average attendance. You know, that's kind of hard too because of COVID the last couple of years. I mean, you go back a couple of years and we averaged 700 or something. You know, so the numbers are a little bit skewed, but they were definitely in agreement that a variance was warranted, but they wouldn't commit to exactly what the variance would be. And again, from it being official, stamped, you're on your way, they really can't do anything until they get a submission and they approve a permitted set of drawings.
That actually makes a lot of sense. I just wanted to hear that I was hoping to hear that there's a legitimate shot because there's precedence and it's reality, and instead of us hopeful. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm very, very confident that we will get some relief. I just am not sure what exactly that relief will look like.
Okay.
As Ms. Chestnut said, I think earlier, might be a design for 3,000 instead of 2,000. I'm very confident we will get some relief, but until we submit, we won't know exactly how much relief we can get.
wonder
I
if
also
we
don't
have
want to
enough
build
capacity today for Friday nights.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I wonder if we have enough capacity today in our portalets for Friday nights.
No, I don't, we probably don't.
My tongue is so firmly in cheek right now, sorry.
Ask any of the ladies. They'll let you know.
The lines.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Jeff.
So are you wanting our opinion right now of what, is that what?
I mean, you're not voting on anything tonight, but you know, we do need to make a decision, I think, probably at the next board meeting. I think you need to make a decision on what you want to do with this. I think we need I do think we need an opinion, because then with your opinions, we can then at least go back to SHP. They're submitting design work on Thursday, so it would be helpful to know
Okay.
where you might be, and then we can actually do something official.
I'll give my
And
opinion.
Thursday.
real quick before, you can state your opinion, but we'll talk what we want opinion-wise here, and then we will talk financing at a later time, and financing might be all of it, it might be 50% of it, it might be, right? We could say
Right.
the 3 or the 6 or what, there's some chunk of it, we can choose to pay some general and some finance.
Right, I
Okay.
think we have like 2 decisions. One, what do we want to build? And then how are we going to pay for it?
Right, yes.
So you don't have to sell me that this all looks awesome. I'm the first one in line for shiny new toys, and I think it looks great. However, the reality is you have to pay for it, and we don't have the money, and these numbers make me really nervous. So I feel I cannot, in good conscience, vote for the gym portion. I mean, we have to replace the parts that we have to replace, the bathrooms, the weight room, whatever. But I don't feel in good conscience that I could vote for the gym, the extra auxiliary, all-purpose gyms, when we are in such a deficit of money. We're gonna put a levy on. We hope that it passes. We don't know for sure that it will. I'm sure we'll do some sort of capital campaign, but we don't know how that will tally out. And so I just feel like at this point, I can only vote for the things that we absolutely need.
I have a question about the gym, actually. A couple questions. We're already at capacity for all of our athletics teams and everything, correct? And
Yes.
what happens if we do not build the gym? Where do those teams go?
Well, I think you have the same issues. You have teams that are going to be practicing until 9 o'clock at night, you know, things of that nature. You have, I think the first thing that comes to mind is cheerleading and our drum and corps, our flags. You know, they're practicing right now in the cafeteria, which is not really designed for that space. So they still don't have a place to go. You have A team, B teams, red, white. You've got multiples in many grade levels. And so this space will be used. And I think that, you know, Jeff would be the one that would say it on mountaintops that don't really count on revenue from this, because if you decide to build the gyms, because we're going to use them internally. They're going to be used internally for sure. So there's a need. I don't think it's a want. I can only speak from that perspective. I do not believe that any of this is a want. These are all needs. And I say that we need we do need the auxiliary gyms. This is my opinion.
So I'd say, I mean, you said shiny new toys. I actually don't love shiny new toys. I like things that are functional, like my 12-year-old minivan. So I want to buy things and build things that are useful for the district, for the long term, that meet our need. And we're a great district. We have so much going for us. We're average size, 6,500 students, and we are short on space right now. Just because we don't have it now doesn't mean we don't need it. We can use it desperately. I mean, when we're sending teams practicing at 9 p.m. on a school night of any grade, that's late.
I totally agree, but it still comes down to we have to pay for it, and if a levy doesn't pass, we're gonna go into fiscal
Caution.
That's if
Caution.
we used it all out of the general fund, though.
If we finance, we won't go into fiscal caution, correct?
No, you would push that, if you didn't pass an operating, you push the fiscal caution down the road.
I mean, eventually, whether we do anything here, we need a levy.
Right.
I mean, they're
Yeah, the
two
lev-
kind of
levy-
separate issues.
The levy is part of this argument. While I understand what you're saying, the levy, according to Mr. Rabe, and I've asked him at least a half dozen times, the levy is irrelevant to this.
Well, it kind of is relevant, because if we use a big chunk of our fund, general fund, that covers for the annual deficit, we'll still need the levy just for operating.
But I don't know how many, I think Mr. Spicer's a broken record. We need a levy in the next few years. Like, it's not changing any of that.
No matter what we do, we probably need to be on the ballot March of '24. That way, if you fail,
Three?
I agree based on our revenues and our spending that we absolutely need to have a levy within the next couple of years. Is that what you said, John, in '24?
Brian says '23. He's the financial officer, so we'll go with what he says.
Okay,
And
so-
the reason I say that is it has to do with collection. So when you're talking about a levy, if you pass a levy in '23, you do not collect it until regardless of when you pass it in the calendar year, you don't start collecting until the following year. So if you pass a levy in calendar year '23, you're not going to collect that until calendar year '24.
in February.
When you're looking at our finances and you're looking at fiscal years, if you pass in '23, you're only going to collect half in fiscal year '24. You're not going to collect the full amount until '25. So that's why I say '23, just because of how the collections fall in the way our fiscal year falls.
Oh, go ahead, Brian, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and when we're looking at levies, obviously we have the cash balance, but when you're looking at levy, what you're looking at is this deficit spending number. Because when you look at the deficit spending number, that's the amount that you gotta generate to replace. So, when we look at, let's just say fiscal year '23, that's a 1 mil levy just to get you even for 1 year. So that's the really truly the piece you have to look at. And when you're talking about levy, obviously you're talking about, you get into how much of a levy, then it comes to how many years do you want that levy to go before you have to ask again for a levy. So that's kind of where, the bottom of the spreadsheet here, what's in here, if you notice at the top of the spreadsheet, there is a line I left in here for levy. Down here towards the bottom, as of right now, a 1 mil levy will generate the $1.178 million. That's all based upon property values. So obviously, that's where property values are at currently. So obviously, they'll get reappraised. In January, February, March, we'll get new values that historically will go up, X number of percent, which will obviously generate additional millage levy. So what you have down here on the bottom is what 1 mil generates. If you passed it in calendar year '23 here, and then in this field, if I just put one mil levy, that calculates there, and you kind of see there's the split.
Yep.
But then it will funnel up here, and you can kind of see where things play out. So I'll share the spreadsheet with you, and obviously you can plug numbers in to kind of see how that all plays out. But that's, when you get into the levies, that's the biggest piece. It's not it's when you pass it, but it also affects when you collect it, and that's the biggest piece of is the collections.
And for the 7th time, whether or not we do this doesn't move the needle on when we need a levy.
No, because this is going to be like one-time money that's you're pulling it out.
So that is loud and clear to me. I mean, for the 100th time. Just to be clear, we haven't passed a levy in 13 years. Is that correct, John? Is that what you told me?
May of 13. May of 13.
2013, okay. I knew there was a 13 in there.
9 years.
Right. So since 2013, we haven't passed a levy. My understanding is that most schools pass levies every 3 to 5. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. That's typical.
That's typical. So we've extended, in this school district, the ability not to go back out to the public for a levy for longer than normal. That has to say something about how we're managing our finances. So we're going back out. To say that that this capital project doesn't impact the levy is true from a timing standpoint. It's absolutely false with the amount of cash on hand, because our levies directly impact cash on hand.
But levies are financing operating. That's year-over-year staff is our most expensive thing. This is a building, a one-time building or buildings expense that we're paying for. So that's the difference. We aren't paying this building every year, I mean, unless we finance it, but we're building it once, we're paying for it once.
Right.
But
So
we have to
obviously you
finance
finance, obviously that needs to be considered when you're doing the levy, because obviously you're committing to that, and you can't default on a loan, basically. You're going to have to pay it.
I guess my point
So
is
that's
it's not
the point.
free.
No.
So this notion of it doesn't impact is not true. It does impact. It's not free. This board has already signaled that the auditorium needs replaced. The board has already signaled that the nest, bathrooms, weight room, and wrestling room needs replaced, because we agreed to tear down the other. Our student athletes have nowhere to go for those two expenses. That's almost $10 million out of this 14,621. The high school roof is something that has to be replaced. that I think prior boards signaled absolutely will come out of the general fund. So what essentially the decision is do we pay for the bleachers in the gym now or later, because they have to be done eventually. I mean, eventually they have to be done. And to your point, Emily, I know there's two of us here, but to your point, these things need to be replaced eventually. So it's when and how are we going to do it is our decision here. And if the levy doesn't pass in 2023, Brian, and we do finance this, we finance the majority of it. Let's say we finance 10 million of this. That means 4.6 comes out of our cash balance. I'm trying to do this napkin math.
It's on the screen. Can you
Yeah.
see, can you see the
No,
screen?
Yeah, you're still gonna have, if you finance it and don't pass a levy, you're still gonna have to pay it. You're still year over year. So it's gotta be considered and factored in.
And it's your opinion that we should, I thought I heard you say this, that you don't feel comfortable in any other scenario except finance, correct?
I just think obviously the levy is a big factor. Without having to pass a levy, I don't think there's any way you could do it without the state eventually coming down. If you pulled the entire amount out of the general fund, I think you're getting on very shaky ground in a year or two without the passage of a levy.
I think, I would be very nervous to not finance any of it too, either. I agree. I mean, I don't think that that's a wise use to pull it all out and get us that close. Ugh. I'd be sweating as much as Brian.
I have a couple of thoughts on this. I agree 100% about the financing. Nobody wants us to get into a fiscal emergency or even the chance of it. I know that the gym is being looked at as something that's maybe not a must-have. I would like to say, I know we talked about, Jerry brought up how we talked about the theater this year, the roof, all these other things that we are now putting money into. We've talked in these meetings about like kicking the can down the road for the next board. I don't want to get to that place with the gym. I think the gym is absolutely needed. Like we were saying, we would have the capacity for things like practices then. We're still going to have time when we're filling it with our own athletes. And our athletes are very important to the school. I mean, we won the ECC All Sports Trophy this year. I think we can all agree that our student athletics program is really important to the school. It's important for the community. I think it's borderline embarrassing that we have such a great district and we don't have the capacity to even let all of our sports teams have their practices at normal times. By doing this at the same time, we're creating efficiencies by building the gym along with the rest of the nest. I think that's saving money as well. I think that's something we need to consider when we're looking at this. And it's definitely something that we need to look into financing and how much of it is financed. I don't think it makes any sense to just take it out of the general fund. But I do think that we need to consider the gym as something that's important and not just some fancy add-on.
And in the past, when Jeff's been talking about, Ms. Johnson's been talking about construction fees, it's been 5% increase year over year. It's probably higher than that with these recent years. I don't see that it will ever even remain flat. I mean, so it's gonna be expensive. And if we were to wait on the gym portion, then all of a sudden, we're gonna have to tear up all the brand-new stuff we just built to access where it would even be built. So now it's more expensive because we've waited a couple years and construction has gone up, and we're tearing up whatever space around it.
I agree with all of, I agree with
We're not
all
gonna
of that.
tear up anything.
I full-heartedly agree with all of that, but we still have to pay for it, and that's what makes me uncomfortable, even with, I agree fully that it needs to be financed as well. The sheer numbers are what makes me nervous.
I do want to point out too, just sitting in a lot of these meetings and work sessions, I also feel like our team has done a really good job of making sure that this is an efficient project. We're not like going all out and building all kinds of crazy things. I mean, we're looking at a partial like pre-engineered building with the brick at the bottom. There are all kinds of things that we're looking at that are cost efficient. And I think that it's a very smart way to do this project.
Okay. I've kind of been quiet here for a little while. We look at a cash balance here of, at the end of this year, of 40 million. Is it 40 million and 500,000?
Right.
That's a big number. There's a reason that's a big number. The reason is, as a district, because of what went on back in the 2000s when we were in fiscal caution for a while, had the district in general, and probably the board a little bit more in guidance, decided that we were gonna do, as I've referred to it, now everybody has picked it up, kick the can down the road a little ways. And we kept kicking the can and kicking the can. Had we dealt with these issues on a normal basis, as we should have with the levy that we had in 2013, number one, we certainly wouldn't have a cash balance of 40,000 at the end of this next fiscal year. That's the first part, and we would also have some of these projects done at a much lower cost. So the fact that we've kicked it down the road, and the boards and the people that have been here previously have done a great job of being champions of taking care of the money and doing good things. It's been amazing. But you've got to take care of what you have. We haven't done that. And we haven't replaced, we haven't built, we haven't added on. We've taken care of what we have, but we need more. We've grown as a district, and we've got to catch up. And the only way you catch up is you hit your pants up and you find a way to do this. And no, you don't want to take it all out of the general fund. No, you don't want to finance all of it. It's got to be a combination of the two. And I think it's the board's job to try to figure out how we do that. I mean, it truly is. I mean, and I've been playing with this spreadsheet for the last 45 minutes here. And again, thank you. We can find a number that we can live with. We've got some other areas where we can get money that directly comes from athletics. We've got we've got a lot of different ways of recouping some of that money. Some of it's already in the fold. Some of it's going to be in the fold within the next year. If you finance, I'll use the number that's up here. If you finance 7 million and you do it over 15 years, that's an annual payment of $630,000. When you start subtracting from that, and part of the subtraction is part of the bathrooms, all of the bathrooms, however that falls out, now you're going to take $500,000 out of there. Then you've got some contracts that are coming up that are going to have to be renegotiated. There may be another $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 there. We've got some other donors within the district that are making annual donations and would continue, and we've certainly got some opportunities within the district of people that have donated in the past. So there are a lot of opportunities to reduce that number from $7 million down into getting closer to $5 million. So I mean, there are a lot of opportunities to do some good things here, and you're never going to have. I don't think in my lifetime, and I'm the old guy in the room here, but in my lifetime, I don't think we're going to have another opportunity to get the gyms done. We're never going to have we're never gonna have a balance that's gonna allow us to do that. And I'm not talking about taking out a 30-year mortgage either. I've already backed it down to 15 years, and that's what I'm working with. So if you wanted to do 30 years, and you, as you said, we could, that takes it down in the 400,000 range, and now you're talking about getting it down into 300,000. But you're certainly leaving a burden on boards for a long period to go.
What's the average interest rate on these types of loans? Like when you amortize it out of the total payment, if you were to use Dave's number of financing 7 million, what are you looking at in
Hang
total
on, I can tell you that.
payments?
On $7 million at 4% for 15 years, the interest amount over that 15 years would be $2.45 million, $2,450,000. Divide that by 15, and it's 150,000. Right.
And I think it's, I haven't done much research into other districts that are building things, but I would venture to guess that most finance some, like, I can't imagine that Sycamore, with all the new buildings they have now, we're able to just say, hey, cash balance, so I think financing, some of it is, it's just, we don't have $10 million waiting around for nothing, and if we did, that would probably be a bad idea too.
How does a district go about, who organizes within the district like a capital campaign? Do you hire like a fundraising consultant, or how and who handles that?
I think that would be dependent upon what exactly you were trying to do. If it's something as small as bricks, that's something we would do ourselves. That's something Aaron Zupka is committed to doing. If it's something larger than that, I personally do not have that type of experience, but maybe somebody does.
There's so many options with so many people in the community that may work for companies that match. I know I was looking it up over the last week, there's a whole slew of companies that will match to elementary school funds, some that only will do like universities and stuff, but there's a whole list of elementary school. I just think like if you could, all these nickel and dimes could quickly add up if you've got the whole community, and even asking restaurants, stores and stuff in the community to just flat out donate to it.
There is definitely not opposition to doing that, but there's somebody that's sitting in this audience that has brought this up before, is that we have multiple groups that keep going to the same people and asking for money. And so it becomes an issue of, do they still have the dollars to give? They're giving X, Y, and Z to different sponsorships or just in general in-kind donations. And so I know that he has Morris is here, Morris has some experience with that and some opportunity in trying to streamline that.
And in my time on the boosters, I will say that one group will cannibalize another group if they can only give so many places, and if they're given to an elementary school and you convince them to give to the Nest, then the elementary school gets shunned because they only have a certain pool of money. So those are
Right, but this is something that's going to benefit the whole community, the whole school, the whole, it's going to benefit more than just one elementary school.
So are you volunteering to lead the campaign?
Well, I don't know, I would be involved in it, I just didn't know how it's normally handled, because I think there's a lot of accessible dollars in different ways. I was also looking into, just like the Bengals did the thing for the turf, there are different theater grants too. I don't know if anyone's looked into those. Like I printed off one, Andrew Lloyd Webber initiative that does stuff for theaters. And so I just think like, I don't know, could the Community Action Committee go into fundraising and look at sources of options? I mean, I don't know. I just think like the world is our oyster. We just need someone to find it.
I'm sure they could. Morris, you're chomping at the bit. Would you like to speak at all?
Go up to the mic, Morris, please.
You look
John,
great. You look great.
You had told me that you and Mr. Zupka were meeting with a couple of folks locally to see what type of sponsorship opportunities. Can you give us an update on that?
We're still waiting from the current vendor to come back to us. So I told you that amount that could potentially be there, and that's it. So we're still waiting for the current vendor to come forward.
Okay.
And they're not slated to come back to us until October, is what we were told last week.
So not to educate anyone from a fundraising standpoint, but Melissa, to answer some of your questions, there are grant writers that you can pay. There's ones right in Cincinnati that on other boards that I sit on, you pay them and then they look at your profile, but there's a payout to not guarantee a payback, but they exist, and they could be specific for whether it's athletics or whether it's the theater. So those are available as one. But just to go back to a few years when this was first discussed by prior board, there was one board member sitting in Dave's seat who took that initiative and Chris Ham, to say, I'm going to go out and try to solicit. And I think he was working on it. Hopefully there's some notes in the file on that, because it'd be a shame to lose everything that he was working on, because this has been known for years as far as what was needed. So I just, again, challenge this board to go back to that information that exists.
And I will do that. I know that is available. We discussed that while he was still on the board, so.
Yeah. And again, he did a lot of homework on it. I don't know how far he got on it. The piece that John was referring to when I first got involved a few years ago with the CAT and then the PAC was that there are so many different groups that are going to the same small companies, because Milford doesn't have a big company. We did, Likens, but he's not there anymore. So everyone taps on the same doors, and they get tired, and their pockets are empty. And yes, the athletic boosters have the biggest clout, maybe because they're the loudest, or they're the strongest, than the band boosters have, and then, lo and behold, all of us come to ask for funds, and they don't exist. So that's the piece that I told John when I first started, that at some point in time, I think Milford as an organization, not only a school district, needs to kind of lay out what we need from our community, from our businesses, and give them an envelope and say, we need 25 grand from you, and here's the things that's going to go towards, and stop this clout of the athletic boosters get more than the band boosters. And I know I'm not going to win a lot of friends, but that's not the intent. The intent is to use the money where you, the board, the school administration needs it. And right now, I'm not sure that is equitable.
And if you really look at the nest as including gyms, I mean, you're now starting to include the band in the piece. Just like when we did the turf over here, now you've got more space for the band to practice on, where they're not standing out in the parking lot getting run over. So,
but I think, Melissa, for every one of the elements, there's answers, but there's got to be somebody doing it.
Right, I just didn't know
yeah.
how
Yeah.
in the past, a school district, if there's one person that, I didn't know how it's done since
Yeah.
I'm new on this board, so that's why I was
I don't
asking.
think there's a benchmark because I've tried to talk to some of the communities when we first got the PAC going. So we talked to Sycamore, we talked to Anderson, we talked to a third one, and I forget which, and each one of them was doing it differently. So there is no benchmark. I even went to the Ohio education group to say, what's the standard? There is none, because I think it's all based on the community that you're in.
Right.
And Milford does not have industry. And-
Right, but like, I know, like, Home Depot is one of the companies that will match. Like, how many employees in the community, Milford, work at the Home Depot? You know, if they all, I don't know, I just feel like there's a lot of different little things. If we can pick off
Yeah.
1,000 here and 1,000 there,
It definitely adds up, and I guess my opinion on fundraising is you do a lot better on fundraising if you are giving something that's of some value rather than, I know there are some organizations that have donation day. I hate donation days because you just, you know, you're not getting anything for value. Now, if they've got any kid that comes up with a discount card that I can actually use, we're gonna buy it, and now I'm gonna have 50 people at my door, and that's okay. I mean, we just, you know, you get something out of what you're donating to.
well, I think what they're gonna get out of it is this whole new thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's back to sort of what Morris said. It's people have a tight purse. You say you want a card. When those kids come to my door, I say, I actually don't want a card, but here's $5. You're selling it for 10, but I'll just give you 5 because I don't want the card, but, you know, I appreciate that you're
To
here.
use that no solicitation sticker?
No, I need to pick one up. I'll stop by your house. But I think it comes back to, we ask a lot of the businesses, and we have a couple businesses that come out again and again and again, and I really appreciate that. We're also not a private school. I mean, I know Moeller can go down the street and get some new fancy whatevers. You know, we're a public school, and so we have, support comes in different ways in the community.
Right, I mean, I just think like if we could work, and like I said, I'm willing to work on it too. I mean, flat out just asking the community, hey, we need this and we need help. If you wanna chip in $50 or whatever, there's a heck of a lot of families that would do that, even without a discount card. They're just like, sure, this is gonna be great for the community, whatever.
So I have a question about that, actually, not to get like too logistical, but so how would that work? Because obviously, like, we need to decide how we are paying for this and what part we're paying for. And then I feel like getting people involved in donations and writing grants and all of that, that would come as a secondary thing. Do we, like, how does that work financially? Like, if we bring in extra money by having like a capital campaign or fundraisers or whatever, and that money goes towards that, and we've already said, like, we're going to finance this portion of it, what happens with that money that comes in from the fundraisers then?
It would go towards making the payment, basically. And obviously,
you could- or if you
unless
got-
you got it before you financed.
Right.
Which obviously, that's a short turnaround. You're probably not gonna get a whole lot by then. So yeah, you're basically using that money to help offset the payment.
Okay.
Or you could pay down the principal in some cases.
Right.
Both of those are good things.
And Brian, you had mentioned the first option of finance is going direct. Do you have any relationships that would help us there? You can make a few calls and give us some more clarity?
Say that one more time?
You had mentioned there's two finance options for us. The
Yeah.
best would be to go direct to the bank,
Correct.
correct?
Yeah, so what we would do is, once you decide which way you wanted to go, and as far as length of term and so forth, what we would do is, we currently work with Bradley Payne Advisors, which is the municipal advisors that we used on the bond issue, which also helped with some of this, figuring this out. That's what they do. They'll take it and they'll shop it around to the various banks to try to find out which bank's willing to lend us the money and at the best rate. So that's what they do.
So we say we want $7 million for 15 years, and they go, take that.
And they'll take
shop
it and they'll
around.
go shopping around to see what they can get.
I think this is all very exciting, and while there's a price tag, I mean, I think that's part of living in a community. You know, we need to do maintenance, and I think what Dave said about previous boards, they had to tighten their belts, and there was lots of reasons they had to do that, but Now we have an opportunity to really help take it one step forward, and the fact that we have the middle school coming in at the same time gives us a lot of efficiencies that we wouldn't had. I mean, even if this had been done 2 years ago, we would have lost on those efficiencies. So I really think it's quite the opportunity that we have before us.
It's getting real quiet up here. Any other comments, Mr. Spicer?
I was just going to say, if there are no other comments, it sounds to me like we can at least report back to SHP that we have minimally, we're going to go forward with the weight room, the wrestling room, the locker room, the little sliver of concession, and then whatever bathrooms we have. What we don't know is about the auxiliary gyms. And so I would propose that we bring that up for discussion and a vote. Is that where we are with this?
At the September meeting?
We need it in, right, it would have to be, I think he's asking September, October, November, September meeting, yes.
9 days from today.
I actually have one more question. I know I brought it up before, but what is the possibility of using some of that outdoor space around that nest area and get the right kind of furniture to call it an outdoor classroom, and then use ESSER money?
Right, yeah. That, we're going to have to talk to the state about that. ODE kind of handles ESSER and some of that stuff, so what can we build into that building to make it that we could use ESSER? So yeah, that's a conversation we can have with ODE, Ohio Department of Ed.
That's one of the approved
Right.
uses of it.
That's a real good thought, yeah. We need to look at everything, just everything. And we will. Any other comments? I believe we've just about talked out. So, the next meeting is a regular board meeting. It is September the 15th, 2022, 6 p.m. in this room. That is all I have there. What I need now is I need a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second?
Call a roll, Mr. Ray.
Mrs. Mason?
Yes.
Mrs. Nolan?
Yes.
Mr. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes, thank you. Good night, everyone.